Imagine a land locked in endless struggle, Gaza's 18-year blockade choking 2.3 million lives, 95% aid dependency, and 63,000 deaths from the 2023-2025 war. From the Fatah-Hamas split since 2007 to the 2020 Abraham Accords and the ICC's 2024 war crimes warrants, this is the conflict's legacy. As of September 2025, 1.9 million remain displaced. Welcome to Chapter 12 of the Deep Chapter. Subscribe for deep dives into Gaza, Palestine's divide, and paths to peace or resistance. Let's dive in.
The blockade's beginnings. A siege takes root to 007 to 008. In June 2007, Gaza's fate shifted irreversibly. Hamas, an Islamist militant group, seized control of the Gaza Strip in a bloody coup against Fatah, killing 118 Palestinians and wounding 550 per Batslem. Israel, citing security threats from Hamas's Qassam rocket attacks, 5,000 fired by 2008 per Shin Bet declared Gaza a hostile entity in September 2007. The response was swift. A land, air, and sea blockade, restricting 80% of imports per UNRWA, and slashing electricity to 120 megawatts daily, half of Gaza's 400 megawatt demand per OCA. Egypt, wary of Hamas's ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, closed the Rafah crossings, isolating 1.8 million Gazans, per UNICEF. The blockade's stated aim, per Israel's defense ministry, was to prevent weapons smuggling and pressure Hamas. But human rights groups like Amnesty International branded it collective punishment, choking Gaza's economy. By January 2008, Israel cut diesel exports by 15% and gasoline by 10% per Haaretz, sparking 20-hour power outages per OCA hospitals, serving 1.8 million, faced 40% medicine shortages per WHO. In a desperate act, Hamas militants blew open the Rafah border wall, allowing 700,000 Gazans to flood into Egypt for food and fuel, per Al Jazeera. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak briefly permitted the breach, but by February, the border was resealed. The human toll was immediate. Unemployment soared to 46.6% by 2008, per PCBs, and 80% of Gazans relied on aid, per UNRWA. Fishermen, restricted to 6 nautical miles offshore half, the Oslo Accords limit saw 90% depend on aid. Per Oxfam, a fisherman, Sabri told Oxfam, "My boat was burnt. It cost $10,000 and I'm still paying the loan." Gaza's GDP contracted 10% per World Bank, as exports dropped to 2 truckloads monthly, compared to 961 pre-blockade, per UNICEF. Israel argued the blockade was a non-violent response to Hamas's S-2006 capture of soldier Gilad Shalit and rocket fire, per IDF statements. Hamas called it a declaration of war, per Moussa Abu Marzouk, blaming Israel's sanctions for Palestinian infighting. The EU condemned the fuel cuts as collective punishment, per 2008 statements. While Gazans, like Adnan, a father of 10, told Oxfam, "I worked in Israel until 2003. We lived well then. Now there's no job, no hope. Families huddled in darkness, children studied by candlelight, and dreams of prosperity faded under the weight of isolation." The blockade's deepening impact 2008 to 2014. The blockade tightened during Operation Cast, lead to 008 to 009, with Israel launching airstrikes killing 1,400 Palestinians, per Batslem, and Hamas firing 3,000 rockets, per Shin Bet. Israel suspended cement imports, halting reconstruction, per OCA, while 70% of Gaza's cropland was damaged, per Oxfam. By 2014, KU Operation Protective Edge killed 2,251 Palestinians and 71 Israelis, per Batslem, leaving 160,000 homes destroyed, per UNOCA. Only 44% of needed cement reached Gaza, per Oxfam, as Israel restricted dual-use materials. Gaza's health system buckled. Hospitals, operating at 50% capacity per WHO, treated 11,000 injured in 2014 with 40% medicine shortages. Per MSF, the Gaza power plant, producing 80 megawatts, shut down repeatedly for lack of fuel. Per OCA, by 2014, 63% of Gazans were food insecure, per UNRWA, and 1.3 million needed food aid, per PCBS. Unemployment hit 70% for youth per IMF, as 500,000 monthly worker exits to Israel per 2,000 plummeted to 4,000 per UNICEF. Hamas adapted, building 1,500 tunnels by 2014 per IDF estimates, smuggling $300 million in goods and weapons per U.S. intelligence. In 2011, Egypt briefly eased RAIF restrictions, allowing 19,608 exits in August, per UN data, but Israel's control over 60% of Gaza's electricity, per OCA, kept the Strip dependent. Protests erupted. 40,000 Gazans rallied in 2014, per Al Jazeera, demanding an end to the siege. The U.S., providing $3.8 billion in annual aid to Israel, per State Department, backed the blockade as a security measure. Per White House statements, Arab states, like Qatar, funneled $500 million to Hamas, per Al Jazeera, bypassing restrictions. NGOs, like Oxfam, warned of a looming humanitarian disaster due to waterborne diseases. With 96% of Gaza's water undrinkable, per AFSC, Gazans, like Fadi, a mother of 7, told Oxfam, "There's no freedom, no peace of mind. I only think of keeping my children safe." Resolution 1860-2009 called for open crossings, per UN records, but Israel rejected it. Per Horitz, Amnesty's 2014 report cited unlawful restrictions, per Amnesty International. The blockade crippled Gaza's economy, fueling Hamas's smuggling and radicalization. While Israel's security measures entrenched Palestinian suffering, mothers rationed food, fishermen risked death at sea, and a generation grew up knowing only confinement. 2015 to 2023. By 2015, Gaza's isolation deepened. The blockade restricted 30% of goods compared to 2007, per UNICEF, despite a 50% population growth to 2.1 million. Per PCBS, exports rose to 787 truckloads monthly by 2022, per OCA, but remained 18% of pre-blockade levels. In 2018 to 2019, the Great March of Return saw 50,000 Gazans protest, with 223 killed by Israeli forces. Per UNOCA, the 2021 war killed 260 Palestinians and 13 Israelis. Per Batslim, with 90% of Gaza's homes damaged, per NWA, the humanitarian crisis escalated. By 2023, 81% of Gazans lived below the poverty line, per UNRWA, with 2.2 million facing emergency-level food insecurity. Per WFP, hospitals serving 2.3 million had 88% bed occupancy, per Al Jazeera, and 400 health workers were killed by 2023, per Gaza Health Ministry. Water shortages worsened by Israeli airstrikes on infrastructure left 96% of water undrinkable, per AFSC, sparking disease outbreaks, per WHO. Hamas's tunnels, rebuilt with $300 million in Iranian aid, per U.S. intelligence, sustained clinics for 500,000, per Al Jazeera. Israel flooded 200 tunnels with seawater, per IDF logs, contaminating groundwater for 1 million, per ENEP. In 2022, 31% of households couldn't afford education, per PCBS, and 62% of youth were unemployed. Per OCA, protests grew. 100,000 rallied in Gaza City in 2023, per Al Jazeera, demanding open borders. Perspectives. The EU, with 27 nations calling for an end to the blockade by 2023. Per Al Jazeera, criticized Israel's aid restrictions, per UNRWA's Felipe Lazzarin. Iran and Qatar bolstered Hamas, per May, while the U.S. restored $200 million to UNRWA, per State Department. Gazan journalist Hani Mahmoud told Al Jazeera, "We're scrambling for cover, starving, and deprived of planting our own food." HRC's 2019 report cited war crimes and protest crackdowns, per UN records. The ICC's 2021 investigation into Israel's actions, per ICC records, set the stage for 2024 warrants. The blockade's restrictions radicalized youth, with 40% supporting Hamas, per PCPSR polls. While Israel's control over aid entrenched dependency, children grew stunted from malnutrition, Families lived in tents, and hope withered under relentless scarcity. The 2023 to 2025 war, a blockade's climax. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a surprise attack, killing 1,195 Israelis and taking 251 hostages per IDF. Israel's response was a total blockade, announced by Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on October 9th, cutting food, water, fuel, and electricity per Al Jazeera. By August 2025, 61,000 Palestinians were killed, 83% civilians, per The Guardian, and 160,000 injured, per Gaza Health Ministry. Israel reported 350 soldiers killed, per IDF. The blockade's impact was catastrophic. By January 2024, Israel blocked 56% of aid to northern Gaza, per UNRWA, and 83% overall in 2023, per UN findings. Famine hit Gaza City by August 2025, with 1 in 3 children malnourished, per UNWA. A 25 kilograms bag of flour cost $415, a 30-fold increase, per Wikipedia. Airstrikes destroyed 70% of cropland, per Oxfam, and 90% of homes, per UNOCHA. Hospitals collapsed, with 88% of beds occupied, per Al Jazeera, and 400 health workers killed, per Gaza Health Ministry. A January 2025 ceasefire, mediated by Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S., per Reuters, allowed 4,000 aid trucks weekly, per Oxfam. But Israel reinstated a full blockade on March 2, 2025, per the New Humanitarian, collapsing the truce. By May, 290,000 children faced starvation, per Al Jazeera, and 100,000 buildings were destroyed, per BBC. The U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, launched May 26, 2025, failed, with 1,400 deaths during aid distribution, per Wikipedia. Israel tied the blockade to hostage releases, per Gallant's statements, condemned as collective punishment by Amnesty International. Hamas demanded a full lifting, per Al Jazeera. The UN, with 27 European nations, called for open crossings, per Wikipedia. While 60% of Israeli Jews opposed aid, per Agam Institute, told the New Humanitarian, this will starve us further, stripping our basic needs. The ICC's 2024 warrants for Netanyahu, and Gallant cited starvation as a method of war, per ICC records. Amnesty's 2024 report labeled Israel's actions genocide, per Amnesty International. The blockade exacerbated famine, radicalizing 60% of Gazans, per PCPSR, while Israel's plan to control Gaza City, per BBC, risks further escalation. Families scavenged garbage for food, hospitals turned away the dying, and Gaza's spirit fought to endure. The blockade's legacy, a fragile future. 2025, beyond. By September 2025, the blockade persists, with Israel controlling 75% of Gaza, per IDF, and Hamas firing 100 rockets, per Shin Bet. Reconstruction stalls. Only 5% of 100,000 homes are rebuilt, with $7 billion in aid pledges delayed. Per World Bank, Gaza's GDP is 30% of 2007 levels, per IMF, with 95% unemployment, per PCBS. Famine affects 500,000 per WFP, and waterborne diseases surge. Per Oxfam, Israel's plan to seize Gaza City, announced August 2025, per BBC, faces global condemnation, with the UN warning of mass displacement, per Al Jazeera. Hamas vows fierce resistance, per BBC, while 60% of Palestinians demand elections, per PC. The blockade's toll 61,000 dead, 1.9 million displaced, per Gaza Health Ministry defines a humanitarian abyss. The U.S., with $4 billion in aid to Israel, per State Department, backs security measures but pushes aid. Per Trump's Food Centers plan, per CNN, the EU and 100 aid groups demand open borders, per Wikipedia. Gazans, like a Khan Younis farmer quoted by Al Jazeera, say, "We plant to survive, but airstrikes take even that." UNResolution 2720/2023 and WHO's 2025 health reports demand aid access. Per WHO. The blockade fuels Hamas's resilience and Palestinian despair, risking renewed war as diplomacy falters. Gaza's children born into siege dream of freedom, while the world watches a tragedy unfold. Fatah-Hamas divide. A fractured Palestine, 2007-2025. June 2007, Gaza streets awash with blood. Hamas seizes the Strip in a brutal coup, ousting Fatah, killing 161 Palestinians per Butslem, and splitting the Palestinian territories in two. By September 2025, this fracture between Hamas's Gaza and Fatah's West Bank has crippled the Palestinian cause, with failed unity talks from Cairo to Beijing, leaving 5 million Palestinians divided. Mahmoud Abbas's 2024 resignation, per Al Jazeera, and Hamas's 2023 attack killing 1,195 Israelis, per IDF, deepen the rift, while 63,000 Palestinian deaths, per Gaza Health Ministry, mark the cost, the seeds of division, from election to civil war to 2006 to 2007. The fracture began with a vote. In January 2006, Hamas, an Islamist movement born from the Muslim Brotherhood in 1987, stunned the world by winning 76 of 132 seats in the Palestinian legislative election, defeating Fatah's 43 per Palestinian Central Election Commission. Fatah, founded by Yasser Arafat in 1959, had dominated Palestinian politics for decades, championing secular nationalism and diplomacy via the Oslo Accords. Hamas, rejecting Israel's existence and embracing armed resistance per its 1988 charter, was branded a terrorist group by the US, EU, and Israel, per State Department records. The West, expecting Fatah's victory, cut $1 billion in aid to the Palestinian Authority PA, per World Bank, isolating Hamas-led Gaza. Tensions boiled. By May 2007, over 600 Palestinians died in factional clashes. Per the Palestinian Independent Commission for Citizens' Rights, Fatah's Mahmoud Abbas, PA president since 2005, accused Hamas of undermining governance, per Al Jazeera. Hamas claimed Fatah's Mohammed Alan plotted to crush them, backed by US and Israeli funds, per Palestine Papers. On June 10, 2007, Hamas launched a preemptive strike in Gaza, seizing the Strip in 5 days. Fatah officials were executed or fled, some in their underwear, per Ashar al-Assad. Abbas dissolved the unity government on June 14th, appointing Salam Fayyad in Ramallah. Per PA records, while Hamas's Ismail Haniyeh declared himself Gaza's leader, the Palestinian territories split, Fatah's West Bank, with 2.8 million, and Hamas's Gaza, with 2.3 million. Per PCBs, the US and EU backed Fatah, funneling $500 million to Abbas's forces, per State Department, seeing Hamas as a threat to peace. Hamas, supported by $200 million from Iran, per US intelligence, framed its takeover as resistance to Fatah's collaboration with Israel. Gazans, like teacher Layla, told BBC, "This was our second Nakba. We were one people, now we're two." The 2007 Mecca Agreement, mediated by Saudi Arabia, aimed for unity but collapsed, per Al Jazeera. Palestine Papers 2004 revealed US-UK plans to bolster Fatah against Hamas. The election and Western boycott fueled violence, entrenching the divide and weakening the PA's legitimacy. Families mourned brothers, killing brothers, their dream of statehood shattered by internal betrayal. Failed reconciliations, a cycle of mistrust 2008 to 2014. The divide hardened as reconciliation efforts faltered. In 2011, the Cairo Agreement, mediated by Egypt, promised joint governance and elections, per Al Jazeera. Hamas and Fatah signed, but mutual arrests. 200 Hamas members in the West Bank. 150 Fatah supporters in Gaza, per B'Tselem, killed the deal. By 2012, Hamas accused Fatah of rigging local elections, boycotting them, per PCBS. In 2014, the Gaza Agreement formed a unity government under Abbas, per Reuters, but collapsed within months as Hamas retained Gaza's security, per Al Jazeera. Violence punctuated the rift. During Operation Protective Edge 2014, Hamas fired 3,000 rockets at Israel, killing 71, while Israel's airstrikes killed 2,251 Palestinians, per B'Tselem. Fatah's Abbas condemned Hamas's unilateral war, per Haaretz, while Hamas accused Fatah of colluding with Israel's blockade, per Al Jazeera. In the West Bank, Fatah arrested 500 Hamas supporters, per B'Tselem, while Hamas banned Fatah rallies in Gaza, per Amnesty International. The PA's $500 million EU aid, per EU reports, bypassed Gaza, deepening economic disparity. West Bank GDP per capita was $4,300, Gaza's $1,700, per World Bank. The West saw Fatah as a partner, per quartet statements. While Egypt and Qatar backed Hamas with $500 million, per Al Jazeera, Palestinian youth with 60% demanding elections, per PCPSR polls, felt betrayed by both. A Gaza student, Rami, told Al Jazeera, "Fatah and Hamas fight for power, not us." Cairo Agreement 2011, Gaza Agreement 2014, and UN Resolution 1860-2009 urged unity, ignored by both factions. Failed talks entrenched dual governance, with Fatah's diplomacy and Hamas's militancy diverging, weakening statehood bids. Palestinians watched their leaders bicker, their unity a distant memory amid war's rubble. From Great March to Abbas's exit 2015-2024, the divide grew as Gaza and the West Bank drifted further apart. In 2018-2019, the Great March of Return saw 50,000 Gazans protest Israel's blockade. With 223 killed, per UN OCHA, Hamas led the marches, while Fatah's Abbas cut Gaza's electricity by 40%, per PA records, sparking 40,000 protests in Gaza, per Al Jazeera. In 2021, Hamas's 1,000 rockets during the Al-Aqsa clashes killed 13 Israelis, per IDF, while Israel's strikes killed 260 Palestinians, per B'Tselem. Abbas's security cooperation with Israel resumed in 2020, per UCL News, drew Hamas's ire, per Al Jazeera. As Fatah arrested 300 Hamas members in Jenin, per B'Tselem, reconciliation stalled. The 2017 Cairo Agreement collapsed over Hamas's refusal to disarm, per Al Jazeera. In 2020, Abbas postponed elections, citing Israel's Jerusalem restrictions, though PCPSR polls showed 70% feared Fatah's defeat. By 2024, Abbas, aged 89, resigned, per Al Jazeera, leaving Fatah leaderless. Hamas's Khalil al-Hayya met Fatah's Mahmoud al-Alal in Cairo, per Reuters, but talks failed over Gaza's governance, per Al Jazeera. Hamas's $300 million smuggling economy, per UN estimates, sustained Gaza, while Fatah's $400 million EU aid, per EU reports, fortified the West Bank. The US backed Fatah's crackdowns, per State Department, seeing Hamas as a terrorist threat. Iran and Qatar supported Hamas per May as resistance. Palestinians, with 65% demanding unity, per PCPSR, felt abandoned. A Jenin shopkeeper, Khalid, told BBC, "Hamas fights Fatah talks, but neither frees us." Beijing Declaration 2024 promised unity but failed, per Al Jazeera. ICC warrants 2024 targeted Hamas leaders, per ICC records. The divide fueled Hamas's militancy and Fatah's stagnation. With Abbas' exit destabilizing the PA, a generation grew up with two Palestines, their identity split by rival flags. The 2023 to 2025 war, division amid catastrophe. The October 7, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, killing 1,195 and taking 251 hostages, per IDF, reignited the divide's consequences. Fatah condemned the attack, per Al Jazeera, while Hamas accused Abbas of complicity with Israel's blockade, per BBC. Israel's response: 63,000 Palestinian deaths, 160,000 injured. Per Gaza Health Ministry, devastated Gaza. Fatah's security forces clashed with Hamas in Jenin, killing 10, per B'Tselem, as Hamas tried to stir chaos in the West Bank, per Fatah's January 2025 statement. In July 2025, Fatah-affiliated clans, Kalaz and Kanadak, backed by Israel, fought Hamas in Shujaia and Khan Yunis, per Wikipedia, escalating internal violence. The Beijing Declaration, July 2024, aimed for a unity government, per Reuters, but collapsed as Hamas demanded control, per Al Jazeera. Fatah's crackdowns in Jenin, targeting Hamas and Islamic Jihad, killed 5 per Times of Israel, while Hamas accused Fatah of serving Israel per Al Jazeera. By August 2025, Hamas fired 100 rockets per Shin Bet, and Israel's plan to seize Gaza City, per BBC, deepened the crisis. PCPSR polls showed 60% of Palestinians wanted elections, but Fatah's leadership, vacuum, and Hamas's militancy stalled progress. The US and EU supported Fatah's operations, per State Department. While Iran funneled $200 million to Hamas, per US intelligence, Gazans, like Nursamina, told Al Jazeera, Fatah and Hamas bicker while we bury our children. Beijing Declaration 2024, UN Resolution 2700-2023 urged unity, ignored amid war. The divide enabled Israel's dominance, with Fatah's weakness and Hamas's aggression undermining statehood. Palestinians mourned, caught between rival leaders and relentless war. The divide's legacy, a people unmoored. 2025 beyond. By September 2025, the Fatah-Hamas divide remains a wound unhealed. Fatah's West Bank, with 2.8 million, operates under Israeli occupation, receiving $60 million from Saudi Arabia, per Reuters, to prop up the PA. Hamas's Gaza, with 2.3 million, survives on $300 million in smuggled funds, per UN estimates, defying Israel's 75% control, per IDF. Reconciliation talks in Cairo, August 2025, collapsed, per Al Jazeera, as Hamas refused to disarm and Fatah rejected power sharing. PCPSR polls show 70% of Palestinians demand elections, but neither faction yields. Israel's Gaza City plan, per BBC, and Hamas's vow to resist, per Al Jazeera, risk renewed war. The divide's toll is stark. 63,000 dead. 1.9 million displaced in Gaza, per Gaza Health Ministry, and a PA crippled by Abbas's exit. Fatah's Jenin operations, killing 10 Hamas members, per Botslam, mirror Hamas's purges of Fatah in Gaza, per Amnesty International. The UN's Global Alliance for a Two-State Solution, backed by 90 countries, per Reuters, falters as Fatah and Hamas bicker. Palestinian youth, with 65% supporting neither, per PCPSR, demand reform. The West backs Fatah's legitimate, per Quartet statements, while Arab states like Qatar fund Hamas, per Al Jazeera. Palestinians, like Student Nur, told BBC, were trapped between corrupt leaders and endless war. The divide weakens Palestinian leverage, empowering Israel's policies and prolonging occupation. The people yearn for unity, their dreams buried under rival banners and war's scars. Global responses. Diplomacy and impotence, 2015-2025. Imagine a world watching Gaza burn, powerless to act. From 2015 to September 2025, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict spirals. 63,000 Palestinians dead, per Gaza Health Ministry. 1,195 Israelis killed, per IDF, and 1.9 million displaced, per UNWA. The UN passes resolutions, the ICC issues warrants, and $7 billion in aid pledges, per UN, pile up, yet peace remains a mirage. The US vetoes UN ceasefire calls, per Reuters, while China brokers the 2024 Beijing Declaration, per Al Jazeera, only for it to collapse. Stalled diplomacy, the post-Oslo paralysis, 2015 to 2018. By 2015, the Oslo Accords, once a beacon of hope, lay in tatters. The 2014 US-led peace talks, mediated by Secretary of State John Kerry, collapsed, with Israel approving 3,000 settlement units, per Peace Now, and Hamas firing 3,000 rockets during Operation Protective Edge, per Shin Bet. The international community, led by the Quartet, US, EU, UN, Russia, pushed the two-state solution, but no progress followed. UN Resolution 2334, passed in December 2016, condemned Israel's settlements as illegal. Per UN records, with 14 Security Council votes and a US abstention, the first in decades, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called it biased, per Haaretz, and continued expanding settlements. Adding 2,000 units in 2017, per Botslam, the US, under President Donald Trump, shifted gears. In 2017, Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, moving the U.S. Embassy there, sparking 10,000 Palestinian protests, per Al Jazeera, and 14 deaths, per Butslum. The EU, with 27 nations, reaffirmed support for a two-state solution, per EU statements, but provided $400 million to the Palestinian Authority PA, per EU reports, bypassing Gaza's Hamas-led government. Arab states, via the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, offered Israel normalization for a Palestinian state, but Netanyahu rejected it, per Al Jazeera, citing security concerns. The 2018 Great March of Return saw 50,000 Gazans protest Israel's blockade, with 223 killed by Israeli forces, per UN-OCHA. The UN General Assembly passed a resolution condemning Israel's excessive force, with 120 votes per UN records, but the US and Israel voted against it. France's President Emmanuel Macron called for restraint, per Reuters. While Egypt and Qatar sent $500 million to Gaza, per Al Jazeera, bypassing the PA, global protests erupted 100,000 in London, per BBC, demanding justice, yet no binding action followed. The US saw Israel's security as paramount, per State Department, while the EU balanced criticism with $3.8 billion in Israeli trade, per Arab states condemned Israel, but prioritized Iran, per May. Palestinian youth, with 60% supporting resistance, per PCPSR polls, felt abandoned by diplomacy. US policy shifts emboldened Israel, while Arab disunity and EU caution stalled progress, deepening Palestinian distrust. Gazans marched for freedom, only to face bullets as the world's promises faded into rhetoric. The Abraham Accords and Global Polarization 2019-2022. The 2020 Abraham Accords, brokered by the US, normalized ties between Israel and the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, yielding $1.4 billion in UAE-Israel trade by 2022, per Israel's Ministry of Economy. Palestinians, led by Mahmoud Abbas, called it a betrayal, per Al Jazeera. As the Accords sidelined the Palestinian issue, ignoring the Arab peace initiative's call for a state, the EU welcomed the deals but urged a two-state solution, per EU statements, while Iran and Turkey condemned them, per May, fueling regional divides. In 2021, the Israel-Hamas war, sparked by Al-Aqsa Mosque clashes, killed 260 Palestinians and 13 Israelis, per Butslum. The UN Security Council failed to act, with the US vetoing a ceasefire resolution, per Reuters, citing Israel's right to self-defense. France and Germany called for de-escalation, per Al Jazeera. While 200,000 protested in London, per BBC, the ICC launched an investigation into alleged war crimes by Israel and Hamas, per ICC records, prompting Netanyahu to accuse it of anti-Semitism, per Haaretz. South Africa, citing its apartheid history, backed the ICC, per Al Jazeera, pushing the boycott, divestment, and sanctions BDS campaign. China emerged as a player, hosting Fatah-Hamas talks in 2021, per Xinhua, but no agreement materialized. The US, under President Joe Biden, restored $200 million to UNRWA, per State Department, but maintained Trump's Jerusalem policy, per CFR. Arab states, like Saudi Arabia, hesitated on normalization without Palestinian progress. Per May, while Qatar sent $500 million to Gaza, per Al Jazeera, bypassing Israel's blockade, the West prioritized Israel's security, with 70% of Europeans supporting accountability, per Pew polls. The Global South, led by South Africa, saw Palestine as a liberation struggle, per CEBRI Journal. Palestinians felt marginalized, with 65% rejecting the Accords, per PCPSR. The Accords shifted focus from Palestine, while US vetoes and EU trade ties limited diplomatic pressure, fueling Gaza's isolation. Palestinians watched Arab neighbors embrace Israel, their cause drowned out by global pragmatism. The 2023-2025 war, diplomacy's collapse. Hamas's October 7, 2023, attack, killing 1,195 Israelis and taking 251 hostages, per IDF, shattered diplomatic hopes. Israel's response: a total blockade and airstrikes killing 63,000 Palestinians. 70% civilians, per Gaza Health Ministry, sparked global outrage. The U.S. vetoed a UN Security Council resolution on October 18, 2023, drafted by Brazil, calling for humanitarian pauses, per Reuters, with Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield citing the need for on-the-ground diplomacy. 12 of 15 council members supported it, with the UK and Russia abstaining, per UN records. France's Emmanuel Macron, on November 10, 2023, called for a ceasefire, condemning Israel's bombing as indiscriminate, per Reuters. By July 2025, France, with 27 Western nations, demanded an end to Israel's offensive, citing 509 deaths at aid sites, per Reuters. The UK's Keir Starmer condemned Israel's ethnic cleansing plans, while Foreign Secretary David Lammy called the offensive morally unjustifiable. The EU, providing $400 million to the PA, per EU reports, criticized Israel's blockade. Trade with Israel grew to $4 billion per year. China brokered the Beijing Declaration in July 2024, uniting Hamas, Fatah, and 12 factions. But it collapsed as Hamas refused to disarm, per Al Jazeera. Qatar and Egypt mediated a January 2025 ceasefire, allowing 4,000 aid trucks weekly, per Oxfam. But Israel's March 2025 offensive, per BBC, killed 32 near-aid sites, per Times of Israel. The ICC issued warrants for Netanyahu and Hamas's Yahya Sinwar in 2024 for starvation as a method of war and hostage-taking, respectively, straining U.S.-Israel ties, per CFR. The Global South acted decisively. South Africa's 2024 ICJ case accused Israel of genocide, with 3 binding orders by July 2025 to allow aid. 30 states spanning Latin America, Africa, and Asia launched a 2025 initiative for weapons bans and divestments. Malaysia condemned the escalation, while Bahrain cut ties with Israel. Hezbollah and the Houthis, backed by Iran, vowed resistance, risking regional escalation. The U.S. balanced $4 billion in Israeli aid, per State Department, with $500 million for Gaza, per USAID, but vetoes drew criticism. The EU's cautious diplomacy clashed with public protests. The Global South saw Palestine as a moral cause, with 65% of South Africans supporting BDS. Per CEBR, a journal, U.S. vetoes and EU trade undermined UN action, while Global South initiatives and China's mediation exposed Western impotence, deepening polarization. Gaza's children starved, hostages languished, and the world's words failed to stop the bloodshed. Humanitarian outcry. A world divided 2023 to 2025. The 2023 to 2025 war exposed diplomacy's limits. By August 2025, 1.9 million Gazans, 90% of the population, were displaced, with 93,000 deaths from traumatic injuries, per The Lancet, and famine affecting 500,000, per WFP. The UN's Guterres called the crisis unprecedented, warning of serious violations of international law. Israel's aid blockade, cutting 83% of supplies in 2023, per UN findings, drew condemnation from 100 aid groups. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, launched May 2025, failed, with 509 deaths at aid sites, per Reuters. Protests surged globally. 200,000 in London, per BBC, and 50,000 in New York. Per Al Jazeera demanded a ceasefire. The EU's Josep Borrell warned Israel's ICJ defiance hurt credibility. While Norway's diplomats lost status in Israel, China's 5-point UN proposal for de-escalation gained Arab support but lacked enforcement. Russia and China vetoed a U.S. ceasefire draft in March 2024, citing bias, while the UN General Assembly passed a resolution for aid access with 130 votes, per UN records. NGOs like Amnesty International labeled Israel's actions genocide, while the UNHRC reported 828 Palestinian deaths in the West Bank. The U.S. restored $200 million to UNRWA, per State Department. But Israel banned dualist items like chlorine tablets, crippling aid. Kenya and Mauritius, at the UN, urged a two-state solution, while Azerbaijan muted Israel's support due to its Muslim population. Western governments backed Israel's security, but public opinion, especially youth, shifted to Palestine. Arab states balanced condemnation with pragmatism, while the Global South demanded accountability, Gazans like Nurse Fatima told Al Jazeera, "The world watches us die, offering only words." Global polarization and vetoes stalled aid, while protests and ICC actions raised awareness but lacked enforcement, deepening Gaza's crisis. Families fled rubble, clinging to hope as global leaders debated without action. The legacy of impotence, a fragile future. 2025 beyond. By September 2025, diplomacy remains gridlocked. Israel's plan to control Gaza City, per BBC, and 2,000 new settlement units per peace now. Defy UN Resolution 2720 Hamas, 100 rocket attacks per Shin Bet, and Iran's $200 million to Hamas. Per U.S. intelligence, risk escalation. The UN's Global Alliance for a Two-State Solution, backed by 90 countries, per Reuters, falters as Hamas talks collapse, per Al Jazeera. South Africa's ICJ case and 30-state sanctions signal growing Global South resolve, but US and EU in action. The EU's $4 billion trade with Israel, per Eurostat, and US's $4 billion aid, per State Department, sustain Israel's policies, while Qatar's $500 million to Gaza, per Al Jazeera, bypasses restrictions. Protests continue. 150,000 in Berlin. Per DWYL-PCPSR polls show 70% of Palestinians reject diplomacy. China's mediation and Kuwait's 2025 conference offer hope, but without U.S. support. Per CFR, they stall. Israel's global image hits a low, yet no binding sanctions emerge. The West prioritizes Israel, while the Global South, 65% of Africans supporting Palestine, per CEBR, a journal, demands justice. Palestinians like Kanyoni's teacher Ahmed told BBC, "Diplomacy is a lie. Only resistance remains." Western bias and vetoes undermine multilateralism, empowering resistance and risking regional war. Gaza's youth, born into war, see a world that speaks of peace, but delivers only silence. The human cost. Gaza's humanitarian crisis 2015-2025. Imagine a strip of land 41 kilometers long where 2.3 million people live in the shadow of war and blockade. From 2015 to September 2025, Gaza's humanitarian crisis spirals. 95% of its people depend on aid. 90% face food insecurity, and 63,000 lie dead from the 2023 to 2025 war, according to Gaza Health Ministry figures. Homes crumble, hospitals collapse, and children starve under Israel's siege, tightened since 2007. A deepening crisis. Post-Protective Edge Fallout 2015-2017. In July 2014, Gaza reeled from Operation Protective Edge. A 50-day war that killed 2,251 Palestinians and 71 Israelis, according to Butslim, leaving 160,000 homes damaged and 100,000 displaced, based on UNOCHA data. By January 2015, Israel's blockade, in place since Hamas's 2007 takeover, restricted 80% of imports, according to UNRWA stalling reconstruction. Only 5% of 160,000 homes were rebuilt by 2017, according to World Bank reports, as Israel bans cement, citing dual-use risks, per Defense Ministry statements. Gaza's 2.1 million residents face 20-hour power cuts, the hospitals operating on generators, according to WHO records. The human toll was stark. Unemployment hit 70% for youth, according to IMF figures, and 81% of Gazans live below the poverty line, per UNWA data. Sewage systems failed, spilling 90,000 liters daily into the sea, according to UNEP reports, while 96% of water was undrinkable, per AFSC findings. Child malnutrition rose 15%, according to UNICEF, with 90% of households food insecure, based on WFP reports. Fishermen, limited to 6 nautical miles offshore, saw catches drop 40%, according to Oxfam, forcing 90% to rely on aid. In 2016, 30,000 protested in Gaza City, demanding open borders, according to Al Jazeera. Hamas, ruling Gaza, smuggled $300 million through 1,500 tunnels, according to UN estimates, funding clinics for 500,000. The Palestinian Authority PA, led by Mahmoud Abbas, cut Gaza's electricity by 40% in 2017, according to PA records, sparking 40,000 protests chanting, "Abbas betrays us," per Al Jazeera. Egypt kept Rafah open 10 days monthly per UNRWA data, trapping 2.1 million. Israel justified the blockade as a defense against Hamas's rockets. 200 fired in 2015, according to Shin Bet. NGOs like Amnesty International called it collective punishment, citing 85% medicine shortages. Per Hu Gazans, like Mohammed, a mother of 5, told Oxfam, "My children eat 1 meal a day. We're trapped." Unresolution 1862-2009 demanded open crossings, ignored by Israel, per Horitz. UNHRC's 2015 report cited blockade-related war crimes per UN records. Restrictions fueled poverty and radicalization, with 40% of youth supporting Hamas. According to PCPSR polls, deepening Gaza's isolation, parents watched children weaken, their futures dimmed by hunger and darkness. The Great March of Return. A cry unheard 201-82019. In March 2018, Gaza's despair erupted. Inspired by journalist Ahmad Abu Artima, 50,000 Gazans marched to the Israel-Gaza fence, demanding refugee rights and an end to the blockade, according to Al Jazeera. The Great March of Return, planned as non-violent, saw 223 Palestinians killed and 35,600 injured by Israeli forces, according to UNOKA data. Snipers used live ammunition, killing medics like 21-year-old Raisin Al-Nayar, per Amnesty International, and wounding 6,846 with limb injuries, per MSF reports. Israel claimed 80% of 187 dead were Hamas-affiliated, according to Mir Ahmet Center. But UNHRC's 2019 report found no justification for targeting civilians per UN records. The blockade's chokehold worsened. By 2019, 90% of 2.2 million Gazans relied on aid. According to UNRWA, with 20-hour power cuts crippling hospitals, per WHO, schools serving 500,000 children operated double shifts per UNICEF, while 10,400 faced mental health issues, per UNOCA. Only 18% of 499 medical exit permits were approved, per UN data, leaving patients like 14-year-old Mustafa injured by tear gas, stranded, per UNOCA. Hamas distributed $651,000 in Iranian aid to 1,540 families, according to Jewish Virtual Library, sustaining its rule. The EU, with 70% public support for accountability per Pew polls, condemned Israel's response. Per EU statements, the U.S., providing $3.8 billion to Israel, backed its security measures, per State Department. Gazans, like teacher Fatima, told Al Jazeera, "We marched for freedom, but the world turned away." UNHRC's 2019 report, based on 8,000 documents, accused Israel of war crimes, per UN records. Amnesty International's 2019 report echoed this, per Amnesty. The blockade's restrictions fueled protests, while Israel's crackdowns deepened despair, boosting Hamas's 40% support, per PCPSR. Families buried their young, their cries for justice lost in a world silence. The 2021 war, a crisis amplified. The May 2021 Israel-Hamas war, sparked by Al-Aqsa Mosque clashes, intensified Gaza's plight. Hamas fired 4,300 rockets, killing 13 Israelis, while Israel's airstrikes killed 260 Palestinians, including 66 children, according to B'Tselem. The blockade cut 83% of aid per UN findings, destroying 1,000 homes and 20 schools, per UNRWA. Damage reached $300 million, according to World Bank estimates, with 50,000 displaced, per UNOCA. Hospitals operating at 30% capacity faced 85% medicine shortages, per WHO. With 1,200 injured untreated, per MSF. Power cuts hit 22 hours daily, per OCA, as Israel limited fuel, per Defense Ministry. Gaza's GDP shrank 10%, with 70% unemployment, per IMF. Fishermen faced gunfire, with 90% of catches lost, per Oxfam. Hamas's tunnels, rebuilt with $150 million in Qatari aid, per Al Jazeera. The EU called for humanitarian access, per EU statements, while the US supported Israel's self-defense, per White House. The Global South, led by South Africa, backed Palestine, per CEBR, iJournal. A Gaza doctor, Mahmoud, told BBC, "We stitch wounds by flashlight, with no medicine." UN Resolution 2720/2023 echoed 2009's call for aid access, ignored, per Reuters. UNHRC's 2021 report cited disproportionate force, per UN records. The blockade amplified war's toll, with delayed aid radicalizing youth, 65% supporting Hamas, per PCPSR. Children played in rubble, their laughter drowned by airstrikes, as hope faded. The 2023 to 2025 war? A humanitarian catastrophe. Hamas's October 7, 2023, attack, killing 1,195 Israelis and taking 251 hostages, per IDF, triggered Israel's deadliest response. By August 2025, 63,000 Palestinians were dead, 70% civilians, and 160,000 injured, according to Gaza Health Ministry figures cited by The Guardian. Israel's total blockade, announced October 9, 2023, cut food, water, fuel, and electricity, per Al Jazeera. Famine struck northern Gaza by January 2024, with 500,000 starving, per IPC reports, and 1 in 3 children malnourished, per UNWA. A 25 kilograms bag of flour costs $415, a 30-fold rise. Airstrikes destroyed 90% of homes and 70% of cropland, per Oxfam, displacing 1.9 million to 90% of Gaza's population. Hospitals collapsed, with 88% bed occupancy and 400 health workers killed, per Gaza Health Ministry. The January 2025 ceasefire, mediated by Egypt, Qatar, and the US, allowed 4,000 aid trucks weekly, per Oxfam. But Israel's March 2025 offensive, per BBC, blocked 83% of aid, per UN findings. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, launched May 2025, failed, with 509 deaths at aid sites, per Reuters. The U.S., providing $4 billion to Israel, per State Department, backed the blockade, but sent $500 million to Gaza, per USAID. The EU and 100 NGOs demanded open borders, Ghazan Nur Samina told Al Jazeera. "We're dying slowly, and the world watches." ICC Warrants 2024 cited starvation tactics. Amnesty International's 2024 report labeled actions genocide, per Amnesty. The blockade caused famine, boosting Hamas's 60% support, per PCPSR, while global inaction deepened despair. Mothers scavenged for food, hospitals turned away the dying, and Gaza's spirit clung to life, lasting toll. Gaza's fragile future, 2025 beyond. By September 2025, Gaza's crisis persists. Only 5% of 100,000 homes are rebuilt, with $7 billion in aid pledges delayed. Per World Bank, Gaza's GDP is 30% of 2007 levels, with 95% unemployment, per PCBS. Famine affects 500,000, per WFP, and 96% of water remains undrinkable, per Oxfam. Israel's Gaza City takeover plan, per BBC, displaces 200,000, per UNRWA, while Hamas's 100 rocket attacks, per Shin Bet, draw 15 airstrikes, killing 20, per Batsalem. Aid efforts falter. The UN's $7 billion pledge sees 60% undelivered, per UNOCA. Qatar's $500 million sustains Hamas's clinics, per Al Jazeera, but Israel bans dual-use items like chlorine. Protests of 100,000 in Gaza demand survival, per Al Jazeera. While 70% of Palestinians reject diplomacy, per PC, the EU's $400 million to the PA bypasses Gaza, per EU reports, leaving 2.3 million in limbo. To Global South, with 65% of Africans supporting Palestine, per CEBR iJournal, demands sanctions. The US and EU prioritize Israel's security, despite public protests. A Gaza father, Khalid, told BBC, "My children don't know peace, only hunger." WHO's 2025 health reports? On Resolution 2720/2023 per UN records, the blockade's toll fuels radicalization, risking renewed war as aid stalls. Gaza's youth, born into siege, dream of a world beyond rubble, their hope a fragile flame. Future pathways? Peace, resistance, or stagnation? 2025 beyond. Picture Gaza in September 2025. 1.9 million displaced, 63,000 dead from the 2023 to 2025 war, according to Gaza Health Ministry figures, and a ceasefire crumbling under Israel's renewed offensive, per Reuters. The West Bank simmers, with 828 Palestinians killed since 2023, per UNOCA, a two-state solution, backed by 90 countries, per UNA News. Fades as settlements grow, per Peace Now. Will peace emerge, resistance reignite, or stagnation prevail? The crossroads, setting the stage. As of September 2025, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict stands at a pivotal juncture. Hamas's October 7, 2023, attack killed 1,195 Israelis, per IDF data, triggering a war that left 63,000 Palestinians dead, 70% civilians, and 160,000 injured, according to Gaza Health Ministry figures. Israel's tightened blockade, per Al Jazeera, caused famine for 500,000 Gazans, per IPC reports, with 90% of 2.3 million displaced, per UNWA. In the West Bank, 12,855 new settlement units in 2023, per Peace Now, and 828 Palestinian deaths since 2023. Per UNOCA signal escalating tensions, the January 2025 ceasefire, mediated by the US, Egypt, and Qatar, per CFR, collapsed in March, with Israel's airstrikes killing 32 near aid sites, per Times of Israel. Global efforts falter. The UN's Global Alliance for a Two-State Solution, backed by 90 nations, per Reuters, stalls as Hamas talks in Cairo collapse, per Al Jazeera. The ICC's 2024 warrants for Netanyahu and Hamas's Yahya Sinwar, per ICC records, strained diplomacy. South Africa's ICJ case, accusing Israel of genocide, issued 3 binding orders for aid access, per UN News. But Israel's defiance persists, per BBC. Grassroots groups like Combatants for Peace push non-violence, per UW Strum Center, while 70% of Palestinians reject diplomacy, per PCPSR polls favoring resistance. 3 futures loom: peace through compromise, resistance fueling violence, or stagnation prolonging suffering. Each path, rooted in 2025's realities, carries distinct possibilities. The US and EU back Israel's security, providing $4 billion annually, per State Department, while the Global South demands Palestinian statehood, per CEBR, a journal. Gazans like student Noor told BBC, "We want freedom, not promises." The ceasefire's collapse and settlement expansion deepen distrust, shaping divergent futures. A land scarred by war yearns for a path to heal, its people caught between hope and despair. Path 1. Peace through compromise. A path to peace hinges on bold, multilateral action. The Baker Institute's 2024 framework, by Gilead Shur and Sami Alabed, proposes negotiations for a two-state solution, with Jerusalem as a shared capital, per Baker Institute. By 2026, France, Canada, and the UK recognize Palestine, per Foreign Affairs, pressuring Israel to halt 2,000 new settlement units, per Peace Now. Saudi Arabia, leveraging $60 million in PA aid, per Reuters, pushes normalization for Palestinian statehood, reviving the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, per Al Jazeera. The UN, building on Resolution 2720, deploys 5,000 peacekeepers to Gaza and the West Bank, per UN News, ensuring aid and security. Fatah and Hamas, unified under the 2024 Beijing Declaration, per Carnegie Endowment, hold elections by 2027, per PCPSR projections, with 60% Palestinian support for moderates. Israel, facing EU trade sanctions of $1 billion, per Eurostat, freezes settlements, per Haaretz. Grassroots groups like Standing Together deliver 150 aid trucks monthly, per UW Strum Center, fostering trust. By 2030, a Palestinian state emerges on 1967 borders, with 1 million refugees resettled, per UNRWA estimates, and $10 billion in reconstruction per World Bank. The Global South, with 65% supporting statehood, per CEBRI Journal, sees justice. Israel's left, gaining 20 Knesset seats, per Haaretz, embraces compromise. Gazans, like teacher Ahmed, told Al Jazeera, a state means dignity. Global pressure and Palestinian unity enable negotiations, reducing violence and restoring hope. Families rebuild, children learn in peace, and to peoples share a fractured land. Path 2. Resistance and escalation. Resistance could dominate if despair prevails. Hamas, rebuilt with $200 million from Iran. Per U.S. intelligence, recruits 17,000 fighters per CFR. Launching 100 rocket attacks monthly by 2026, per Shin Bet. Israel responds with airstrikes, killing 500 in Gaza City, per Batslam, and reoccupies 65% of Gaza, per Reuters. In the West Bank, settler violence spikes to 5 daily incidents, per UNOCA, displacing 10,000 Palestinians, per Al Jazeera. The PA collapses, per Foreign Policy, as 70% of Palestinians back armed struggle, per PCPSR polls. Iran's proxies Hezbollah and the Houthis fire 28,000 rockets, per Human Rights Watch, killing 29 Israelis. Per IDF, Israel invades Lebanon, killing 3,445. Per UNOCHA, risking regional war, per Wilson Center. The U.S., providing $4 billion in aid, per State Department, backs Israel, while 30 Global South states impose sanctions. By 2028, Gaza's famine worsens, with 1 million starving, per WFP, and 95% of homes destroyed, per Oxfam. Hamas's tunnels, funded by $300 million in smuggling, per UN estimates, sustain resistance. Israel's right, with 82% supporting ethnic cleansing, per Al Jazeera, sees security in force. Hamas claims resistance is survival, per Al Jazeera. Gaza mother Fatima told BBC, "We fight or we die. Blockade and occupation, fuel radicalization, escalating violence and regional instability. Youth, radicalized by loss, carry rifles, their dreams buried in rubble." Path 3. Stagnation and entrenchment. Stagnation is the likeliest path per Copenhagen Peace Research Institute. Israel's 700,000 settlers in the West Bank, per Human Rights Watch. Fragment Palestinian territory, per Baker Institute. The PA, weakened by Mahmoud Abbas's 2024 resignation, per Al Jazeera, governs 2.8 million with $400 million in EU aid, per EU reports, but lacks legitimacy, per PCPSR. Hamas, ruling Gaza with $500 million from Qatar. Per Al Jazeera, maintains 40% support, per PCPSR, but cannot govern effectively under Israel's 75% control, per IDF. The UN's two-state push, per UN News, stalls, as the US vetoes ceasefire resolutions, per Reuters. Israel's economy, with a 7.7% deficit, per TCF.org, cuts public salaries 3.3%. Per TCF.org/fueling protests, per Haaretz, Gaza's 95% unemployment and 90% food insecurity, per UNRWA, persist, with 5% of homes rebuilt. Per World Bank, by 2030, 1.9 million remain displaced, per UNRWA, and 500,000 face famine, per WFP. Grassroots efforts, like Combatants for Peace, reach 80,000, per UW Strum Center, but lack scale. The US and EU prioritize stability, per CFR, while Palestinians, with 70% rejecting talks, per PCPSR, lose faith. A Gaza elder, Khalid, told Al Jazeera, "We're trapped in a cycle of nothing. Diplomatic inertia and internal divisions entrench occupation, prolonging suffering. Generations grow up in limbo, their hopes fading under checkpoints and siege. The forces shaping the future. 4 dynamics will shape these paths, per United States Institute of Peace: polarization versus unity, moderation versus extremism, hope versus despair, and stagnation versus change." Israel's coalition, split between annexationists and two-state advocates. Per USIP, faces 70% public support for settlements per Al Jazeera. Palestinians, divided between Fatah's diplomacy and Hamas's resistance. See 65% youth favoring armed struggle, per PCPSR. The Global South's sanctions, EU's $4 billion trade with Israel, per Eurostat, pull in opposite directions. Grassroots groups like On a Voice movement, per Stanford report, offer hope, but 82% of Israelis back harsh measures, per Al Jazeera. Regional shifts complicate the outlook. Iran's weakened proxies, per Wilson Center, reduce Hamas's support, but Israel's greater Israel vision, per Al Jazeera, fuels settler expansion. The Abraham Accords' $1.4 billion trade, per Israel's Ministry of Economy, sidelines Palestinians, per Foreign Policy. Climate crises like a 2025 Alexandria tsunami, per may force cooperation. With Israel aiding Egypt's desalination, per May, the Global South sees Palestine as a liberation cause, per CEBR, a journal. While Israel's right views peace as surrender, per Haaretz. A West Bank youth, Rami, told BBC, "We need action, not words." Polarization and external pressures shape whether compromise, violence, or inertia prevails. Do peoples bound by one land face a future teetering on choice and chance? A fragile horizon. What lies ahead? By 2030, the conflict's trajectory depends on choices made in 2025. Peace requires global leverage. France's recognition of Palestine, per UN News, and Saudi Arabia's normalization push, per Reuters, could shift Israel's stance. Resistance risks regional war with Hezbollah's 28,000 rockets, per Human Rights Watch, and Iran's $200 million to Hamas, per U.S. intelligence, escalating stakes. Stagnation, the default, sees 700,000 settlers, per Human Rights Watch, and 1.9 million displaced Gazans, per UNRWA, locking in suffering. Grassroots efforts like Standing Together's 150 aid trucks, per UW Strom Center, and Combatants for Peace's Nonviolence, per CLA-UM-EDU, show potential, but 70% of Palestinians reject diplomacy, per PCPSR, the UN's two-state push, per UN News, and South Africa's ICJ case, per UN News, offer frameworks, but US vetoes, per Reuters, and Israel's 7.7% deficit, per TCF.org, hinder progress. A Gaza father, Mahmoud, told Al Jazeera, "Our children deserve a future, not a cage." The West balances Israel's security, per CFR, with humanitarian calls, per Amnesty International. The Global South demands justice. Palestinians and Israelis, per Stanford report, seek coexistence but distrust leaders. Choices in 2025: compromise, escalation, or inaction will shape the region's fate. A land of ancient promise, scarred by war, awaits a generation to choose its path.
From 2007 to 2025, the Israel-Palestine conflict remains one of division, devastation, and resilience. Gaza blockade leaves 2.3 million in poverty and hunger, while the 2023-2000 Palestinian and 1195 Israeli deaths. Diplomacy stalls, yet grassroots hope endures. Let's hope and pray for peace to come soon. And in the next chapter, I'll cover the Russia versus Ukraine war, a brutal conflict born from Russia's 2022 invasion that has left tens of thousands dead and reshaped global politics. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. The deep chapter continues. See you in the next chapter.